All right, we are back. We were having technical difficulties. I believe those issues have been resolved. So we're going to, also let me say again, as you all who watch the show probably know by now, when you see me with a hat on, it means I need to get a haircut. And with the inclement weather here in Washington, D.C., didn't get a chance to get to the barbershop. So with all those mysteries now being solved, let's get back to the discussion with Dr. Linwood Tauheed. And I believe when we had the problem, we were just wrapping up the discussion about the Chinese electric vehicles, and that the BYD is considered to be one of the best electric vehicles in the world. But for some reason, they can't make their way into the American market in spite of this idea of the free market is what is supposed to be controlling our economy. Dr. Tauheed.
Well, it's one thing to understand is that the U.S. economy has never been a free market. It's been free market ideology has been the way it's been sold, but it's never been a free market. And part of this rush to tariffs by the Trump administration and also the Biden administration is based on an idea of, I'll say, make America great again, going back to how America became a great nation in the 19th century. In the 19th century, the U.S. Was now no longer a colony of Britain. It was on its own, but its economy was smaller than the economy of Britain, which was the global superpower at the time. And tariffs were put on products from Britain and Europe in general. And in that situation, tariffs were the thing that helped the U.S. economy to grow. But the economic situation in the time was that England was a high wage country, a low wage country, and so putting tariffs on English goods means that if you then initiate an industrial policy where you're going to produce those goods that you used to import, what we call import substitution, then U.S. manufacturing is growing and can produce those goods at a lower cost than those English goods would be, even in England, without the tariff. The tariff is put up to encourage the U.S. purchasing of U.S. produced goods. So you had two things going on. It wasn't just the tariff, but you also had the development of manufacturing in the U.S. To replace those goods that are not now coming from England. A good example is the textile industry. England was the textile leader. The U.S. puts tariffs against English textiles and then begins to develop its own textile industry. And the textiles that are produced in the U.S. with low wages are less expensive than the tariffs that are produced from England. Jobs increase in the U.S. and the U.S. economy begins to grow. That's the 19th century. That's not the 21st century. It's not even the second half of the 20th century. In the second half of the 20th century, U.S. is a high wage manufacturer. China is a low wage manufacturer. And when you put up tariffs against a low wage manufacturer, even if you're able to do an import substitution and begin to produce those goods that you used to import from China, like electric vehicles, those electric vehicles are going to be so expensive that no one is going to, well, very few are going to be able to buy it. It's not something you want to do. But the U.S., in fact, does not have an industrial policy that would allow it to compete in manufacturing against China. And so what we'll get is expensive products, very expensive products from China, and no U.S. jobs created to replace those products. We have the worst of all possible worlds. So looking back in the 19th century, which is what the Trump team is doing, and saying that it was tariffs that made the U.S. great. Yes, that's true for the 19th century. It is exactly the opposite for the 21st century.
And one of the other elements here is another one of the bullet points that they talk about or ideas: repeal clean energy programs. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 was one of Biden's chief legislative victories, the largest investment to fight the climate crisis in the U.S. Among the moves that could raise revenue, revoking the 7,500 electric vehicle tax credit, new vehicle emissions rules, and other incentives for clean energy production. One of the things that I think should have people up in arms about this are, for one, the fires that are taking place in Los Angeles right now. I'm from California. I got family in Southern California. I'm getting pictures from patios and rooftops of Los Angeles on fire. That's climate related. The Trump administration should not be talking about removing climate policy. It should be talking about making climate policy more robust. And then I think also when you throw in the reality of environmental racism, when you start removing a lot of these climate policies, a lot of that impact is going to be disproportionately borne on the shoulders of communities of color.
Yes, and we can certainly know that the Trump administration is not interested in the issue of environmental racism. That's not in their calculus. But if I'm not misremembering, it is unusual to have fires in Los Angeles in the wintertime. I mean, those fires, if I remember, are summertime events.
Correct.
Now we are, freezing here in the Midwest, and I understand on the East Coast as well, while we're having fires in California. This is an unusual. This is climate, obviously climate related to anyone with eyes. And the problem of climate is not just that Los Angeles is burning, but that California is burning. But of course, California is a huge agricultural state, which means that farmland is going to be affected, and food production is going to be affected. And so the lives of persons in California who are being devastated by these fires as a perennial event. Now you have fires in the winter and fires in the summer. It's kind of an all every season type of thing, but it is certainly going to affect everyone else in the country. And so that is certainly not just a California problem. That is a national problem, and you would think that the U.S. government would respond to that national issue. But of course, the Trump administration is, along with Republicans in general, are climate crisis deniers, and don't want to give any credence to the idea that California burning might be connected to climate crisis.
And I think one of the things that Donald Trump said to the California governor was, he was putting conditions around federal dollars that were going to go to Governor Gavin Newsom as the governor of California to mitigate some of this fire damage. The incoming Trump administration is playing politics with the lives, the livelihoods, and the homes of people in California. If this were Texas, a predominantly red state, I don't think Donald Trump would be having the same conversations with the governor of Texas that he's having with Gavin Newsom.
Probably not Texas or Florida or any of those red states that are very, very much attuned to a Trump presidency. But let's not forget that we had hurricanes in South Carolina, and the Biden administration sent pittance for support for South Carolina while it was pushing more money out the door to Ukraine. So this is not just a partisan issue. in terms of money for military spending, money for other places, as opposed to money for U.S. citizens. This is a political system that's broken on both sides of the aisle.
And just a couple of more bullet points here, because I want people to really understand upon whose shoulders or upon whose back these tax cuts are really going to be borne. He's talking about cutting food stamp benefits, $180 billion. In 2021, the Biden administration unilaterally implemented the largest increase in nutrition assistance benefits in U.S. history, a move hailed by anti-poverty advocates. Slashing that expansion could save $180 billion over the next decade. But okay, you're going to save $180 billion, but where are people going to get their food?
Yes, this Trump tax cut extension is expected to reduce government revenue by, well, increase the debt, which means reduce government revenue by $5 trillion over the next 10 years. That $5 trillion is $100 billion here, $100 billion there, and those here and there's are going to be social programs. The military will never have a cut in their spending, but the social programs now. The cuts in the social programs are being presented as we don't have any money, therefore we have to cut spending somewhere. We can't spend it on the military because that's a matter of security. China is, ready to attack. Russia is going to come over the border of Ukraine and end up in Los Angeles, and so we have to spend there. And so the places that are proposed to be spent are the social programs, but this is not new. And it's not just a Republican process for cutting social programs. We should remember that during the Obama administration, there was a movement, there was a commission that Obama set up to look at government spending. And the recommendation from that commission, bipartisan commission, headed by a Republican and a Democrat, was that we didn't have the money to spend on social programs, and we needed to pull back on social program spending. It's not just a Republican issue. This has been, the reduction in New Deal programs, Social Security, Medicare, and then Great Society programs in terms of Medicaid and food stamps. Those fights have been going on since those programs were started, since the Great Depression in the 30s, and since the New Deal, the Great Society in the 60s. Republicans were the ones who were wanting to push back on those programs from the very beginning. And unfortunately, Democrats have drunk the Kool-Aid, have moved to the right, and also now want to cut those programs with an idea that doing so would be fiscally responsible because we've run out of money. We've run out of money while we're sending money to Israel and Ukraine, and the military budget is increasing pretty much beyond limit.
And now you're talking about austerity measures. When you start talking about ending the New Deal programs, that was Franklin Roosevelt, a Democrat. You're talking about the Great Society programs. Those were Lyndon Baines Johnson, a Democrat. And now, thank you, Bill Clinton, for moving the Democratic Party to the right with the Democratic Legislative Council, Al Gore and so many others. This is where we are in our politics today. This is not your grandfather's Democratic Party. And this is what folks who are so blindly wedded to that big D Democratic name, this is what they need to understand. You're being sold a pig in a poke.
Yeah, when I think of, for example, the Trump administration, and think of the role that an Elon Musk is playing in the Trump administration with his Department of Government Efficiency, just conveniently named after the cryptocurrency that he promoted, DOGE. I think of Al Gore's role in the Clinton administration. It's the same role.
Reinventing Government as We Know It was the name of the study.
Yep, and what the Clinton administration focused on and achieved was not just deficit neutral spending, but they ended up with a surplus. The government began for a couple of years, brought in more revenue than it spent because of we had the change, for example, from AFDC to TANF,
Hmm.
which put work requirements on spending for children, and that and other things decrease government spending. Now, one of the things in an economic situation that we understand is that at least economists who look at the economy the way that I do and others, is that decrease in government spending, that surplus in 1999 and 2000 during the Clinton administration, ended up creating a recession in 2001 when George Bush II became president. So this decrease in government spending that is not just neutral in terms of finance, but the decrease in government spending will also reverberate out into a greater recession in the economy. When you cut food stamps, then persons who were on food stamps can't go to the store and buy groceries. That means that the store gets less revenue. That means that they have to lay off their employees who have now no income, who have don't can't go out into the economy and spend, and so we get this multiplier effect of decreased government spending that ends up affecting, quote, the real economy, while Wall Street does well because the increase in taxes means that increased profitability for corporations. So Wall Street does well with these tax cuts. Main Street is going to be devastated.
And final bullet point in this particular article, and this is one that just totally befuddles me. I mean, I understand their long-term objective, but eliminating the Department of Education. They say that this is projected to save $200 billion, but when we have a discussion with, for example, the H-1B1 visa
Mhm,
issue,
mhm,
where Silicon Valley can't find enough highly trained engineers
mhm,
to staff domestic software development
mhm,
corporate companies, but you want to eliminate the Department of Education, which can only lower the standard.
mhm.
Wasn't it Jimmy Carter that created the Department of Education? I
Yes,
think
yes,
I think it was
yes.
to raise the standard of
Mhm,
education in the
mhm.
country. You now want to cut the Department of Education, which will only lower the standard of education in the United States.
Yes, the H-1B visa crisis is an interesting, let's say, internal fight that's happening in the Republican Party because Trump campaigned in eliminating and talked about eliminating the H-1B visa program
Mm-hmm.
because these immigrants who were coming in, supposedly highly qualified in tech and mostly software, were taking American jobs. In an earlier career before I became an economist, I was a software developer, and I ran my own company in the 90s. And one of the things that came up even in the 90s was that there was an increase in H-1B visa use to hire programmers, mostly from India into the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
and with a claim that we could not find U.S. programmers, and so we had to bring in immigrants. And in fact, there was simultaneously layoffs of programmers at U.S. Programmers at companies, tech companies, and
Mm-hmm.
so in fact there was a situation that became obvious where a programmer working for a U.S. company, a U.S. programmer, would train their replacement who would be coming into the country on an H-1B visa. And so now that programmer is unemployed, and you're claiming that you can't find a programmer, someone you just fired. That phenomena is continuing on. And that recognition that the H-1B visa, particularly for these highly trained, supposedly highly trained immigrants, is a farce, and it will not create new jobs. In fact, it's going to decrease the number of persons working in tech. So we have layoffs, for example, much of it due to artificial intelligence replacing programmers, and so you have these tech companies that are laying off tens of thousands of programmers, while someone like Elon Musk is wanting to increase the number of H-1B visas for programmers. And the analysis of that is very simple. Immigrants who are coming into the country on H-1B visas are much easier to control.
Mm-hmm.
They will work, technically, I guess, officially, they're working 8 hours a day, but they'll work 16 hours a day
Mm-hmm.
and only get paid for 8 hours a day. Because otherwise, their visa will be revoked and they'll be sent back to where they come from. U.S. programmers are not inclined to do that. They might, in fact, say, hey, well, maybe we need to unionize in order to get our fair wages. And so U.S. Programmers and U.S. Workers in general are not as compliant as H-1B visa workers, and that's the real reason that someone like an Elon Musk or anyone else is promoting H-1B visas, because you get cheaper labor. If you work someone twice as long but pay them the amount, you're actually paying them half as much. Labor costs go down and profitability goes up. And that's what this is all about. And that's creating a problem in the Republican, among the MAGA folks, because they are the grassroots are pushing back at the elitist MAGA, like Vivek Ramaswamy and
Mm-hmm.
Elon Musk, and saying, well, this is not what we signed up for. We didn't vote for Trump to eliminate our jobs, to increase H-1B visas. And so there is, at least in the Republican Party, this struggle, which is making obvious that what these Elon Musk and so forth are wanting to do in the Trump administration is to increase the probability of billionaires, increase Wall Street, and leave Main Street behind.
In fact, as Ernest Heckard says, they talk out of both sides of their mouth, because to your point, Donald Trump was against the H-1B visa program until Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy got in his ears and told him that he needed to be for that program, which then raised the ire of Steve Bannon. And Steve Bannon is now on the warpath, talking about the program doesn't need to be extended or increased, that the program needs to be decreased. Staying still, go ahead.
In this fight between Bannon and Musk, I'll put my bet on Bannon,
because he knows how to fight.
Yes.
that dude knows these trenches. There's an interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal. Unemployed office workers are having a harder time finding new jobs. More than 1.6 million unemployed workers have been job hunting for at least 6 months. The economy has added more than 2 million jobs over the past year, but more people who are out of work are having a hard time getting back in. A labor market that looks healthy in the headlines is under the surface weaker than it seems. And this is something that you and I have been talking about for at least 2.5 years.
Exactly. We've been talking about the fact that the unemployment rate, which is now, I believe, 4.6%, is an unreliable indicator of the health of the economy. The unemployment rate means that if someone has a job and they work 1 hour a week, they are employed. We think of employment, particularly in terms of unemployment, as being a full-time job. And at one time, it was having a 40-hour a week full-time job was kind of the norm. And so the unemployment rate reflected the fact that people were working full-time and getting a full-time pay. Now that we've had this increase in what we call the gig economy, where more and more people are working part-time, you've got the Uber and the DoorDash delivery folks. I mean, if you got a car, you can become an Uber driver. Now, you may have been unemployed, you were laid off, but you've got a car, and so you can become an Uber driver and work a few hours a week or whatever the customer demands. You are now employed.
Mm-hmm.
And so the unemployment rate of 4.6% is hiding the fact that so many of those jobs are part-time jobs, which means, of course, people are getting part-time pay and cannot afford the things that they used to afford.
And
And
no
so,
benefits.
and no benefits. And so while the unemployment rate of 4.6% seems good, it means that there are lots of underemployment going on, and which means that the labor force is not as healthy as the statistics indicate. And so we need new metrics. We need to take account of the number of people who are working part-time, who would like to work full-time, who are getting part-time pay, who can't afford their expenses. And that would give you a better indication of how the economy is doing.
And, final domestic issue, President Biden signed a bill increasing social security benefits. This past Sunday, he signed what's called the Social Security Fairness Act.
Mhm.
It eliminates a 20-year provision called the windfall elimination provision, which
Mhm.
basically meant if you're a government employee, if you're a police officer, a firefighter, a nurse, a postal worker, a public school teacher, and you're getting a pension,
Mhm.
then your Social Security benefits were adjusted downward.
Mhm.
Even though you paid the
Right.
same rate as everybody else,
Right.
you were going to receive less in your Social Security benefits upon retirement. And I think we may have just lost the show. Let me
Oh,
see. No, okay, we're good.
yeah.
And Joe Biden just signed legislation making that bringing back that parity. It'll talk about the impact of that, and it'll also be very interesting to see if Donald Trump tries to do anything with that.
Yes, the impact of that is to create greater fairness for those government employees who, as you said, were paying the same rate into Social Security as everyone else. They weren't exempt from Social Security. They were paying the same rate, yet they did not get the same benefit out of Social Security. Now, we're talking about government employees, particularly federal government employees, and the African American community has a high rate of employment in the federal government. And so the African American community of federal workers have been, for at least 20 years, existing under that process where they were being unfairly treated in terms of Social Security. They were getting a government pension when they retired, but they couldn't get their full Social Security. So Biden, by doing this, has corrected that problem. Now we get into the Trump administration, and Trump has promised to fire government employees.
Mm-hmm.
And so, let's
In mass.
exactly. Yeah, just because I forget exactly what the provision is, but by applying an idea of loyalty to government employees, by executive order, the president can put employees on what I think is a different schedule that allows him to go around the civil service provisions and begin to fire employees. That's going to have a devastating effect on the African American community because of the high rate of employment of African Americans in the federal government. So, I guess Biden gives and Trump takes away. I was, in fact, surprised that the Biden administration did this because they have been pretty weak in most things in terms of labor, in spite of being positioned as the most labor-friendly president ever. And I suspect that not to be facetious here, that this is not a Biden initiative. It's an initiative by someone else in the administration that wants to give a win for a Democratic Party going out the door. But it's a good thing that it's happening but it's going to be threatened by Trump. I would be surprised if Trump doesn't try to reverse that.
And I'll have to go back and look, unless you know the answer. Under whose administration was this put in place in the first place?
That I don't
Yeah,
know.
I have to go back and look at this. Holistic Politics, who joins us from Finland, says it feels the trajectory is the same, albeit we have more welfare structures to take down one by one. But I will observe how things turn out here. I think what and then the Holistic Politics says losing and this is Finland, losing our national central bank money meant we lost monetary policy back in the 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
And again, Holistic Politics, thank you for joining us. And Holistic Politics, it's your responsibility to get everyone in Finland watching the program. And I appreciate your efforts in getting us there. Let's move now over to the foreign economic issue, particularly in an area where you are doing a lot of work, which is West African monetary and economic sovereignty, because it seems as though the population in West African countries is growing, economies are expanding, but I'm concerned that entities such as USAID with their Africa trade and investment program, they are expanding their influence, which, in my humble opinion, based upon the history of USAID, that doesn't bode well for the average citizen in Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Equatorial Guinea, Ghana, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, Togo. Those countries, their citizens may not fare as well as those interests that are serving the interests of American interests. Your thoughts?
Well, we have, of course, a situation in West Africa that is, I think we're in kind of a watershed situation. We have the new rulers, the new leaders of Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, who and military leaders who engaged in a coup to get rid of the prior presidents who were very much beholden to the West, to France in particular, but also to the U.S. There were military bases in those countries, and those countries who are part of what's called the Sahel, the former French colonies, the new French neocolonies, have the new leaders have pushed the French out, have told the French to go home, and have executed that policy, along with telling the U.S. also to go home. And so those countries standing up to and wanting to create a new relationship between their people and the leadership, as well as wanting to de-link the relationship with the former colonial countries, particularly France, but also the U.S. and the neo-colonial relationships. I suspect that USAID will not have very many inroads into those countries. We now have Chad, which is also a Sahel country. We have which has pushed the French out. We have Senegal that has joined that process, and Cote d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast, which has joined that process of telling the French they are to leave. And one of the things that has to happen and is happening is that these countries that are telling the French to leave are also looking at what we would call monetary sovereignty. That is, they're getting control of their currency, because these countries were in fact using the currency that was under the control of the French, even though they were supposedly independent countries, gaining their independence in the 1950s.
Hence colonialism. For people that don't quite understand colonialism versus neocolonialism, you had European countries taking control over Niger
Mhm.
and these other African countries. Then you had the revolutionary periods where they gained independence,
Mhm.
but they really only gained flag independence.
Yeah.
They weren't actually controlling their economies, hence neocolonialism. And
Yes.
now that's being overthrown.
Yes, what was put in place, in fact, was when French were in control of the colonies in Africa. The France was the largest colonial power in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
When they were in control, they had a currency that was called the colonial franc of Africa, right? Which meant that the currency, that the money that was being used in these French colonies was being printed in France
Mm-hmm.
and shipped to these colonial powers, and trade had to be done in these currencies, which meant that the French were in control of how much money of the money supply, the size of the money supply. And when these countries became, quote, independent, as you say, flag independent, they continued to use that currency.
Mm-hmm.
They changed the name to the CFA
Mm-hmm.
instead of the colonial franc of Africa, but they continued to use that currency. Now, what's happening as these countries are becoming more very much aware that they need to become monetarily sovereign, not just flag independent, is that they're looking to create their own currency that is delinked, disconnected from the French currency, which means that the French will not be able to manipulate the money supply in these colonies. But it goes more than deeper than just the currency. For example, Niger has been a huge supplier of uranium, for
Mm-hmm.
example, to France. France has the largest production of electricity from nuclear power plants because of uranium from Niger.
Mm-hmm.
On the open market, the cost, the price of uranium is about $60 per pound, about $120 per kilo. The companies that were mining uranium in Niger were paying less than $1 per kilo,
Wow.
and then reselling that for $200 per kilo on the open market. That relationship has come to an end,
Mm-hmm.
where Niger is saying, this is our uranium, we will mine it, and we will sell it on the open market for whatever the market will bear.
Wait a minute, you're leaving out one step.
Mhm.
They will mine it, they will process
Yeah.
it, because that processing process
Right.
is huge. Whether you're talking about the coca plant,
Mhm.
whether you're talking about bauxite, whether you're talking about aluminum,
Mhm.
whatever it is, the processing
Mhm.
element of this is key as well.
Yes, and in fact, it's the processing that the French use to justify giving $1 for a kilo, but it
Mm-hmm.
takes so much to process it, and then can French process it and sell it for $200 per kilo. Yeah, it's the processing, and the processing is going in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso to a level where they are now beginning to build, in the process of building their own nuclear power plants to provide
Mm-hmm.
electricity to their country, and also be able to transport that electricity to other African countries. And so it's not just the Sahel countries that are going to benefit from Sahelian monetary and economic sovereignty. It's the rest of African countries, if they are willing to delink their trade from the West.
Thank
These
you more. Two things. One, thank you, Muammar Gaddafi, and two, I got to thank Dolan Duckett for your $5 super sticker. Thank you for coming back. Great show. Uh, Dolan, thank you for your contribution. Sorry for that interruption, Dr. Tauheed.
Yes. And so monetary and economic sovereignty is directly linked to decolonization. And so decolonization, the idea that you have to get rid of these colonial powers that have military presence in these countries because it's the military presence that maintains the control of the economy, that protects these foreign entities that are mining uranium, mining cobalt, mining other minerals, diamonds and gold, and shipping it out of the country where the people who are doing the mining that those raw materials belong to are getting pennies, well, less than pennies on the dollar for their effort. And so the Sahel countries led by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are setting a stage where other French-speaking countries are following the lead.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, there are a number of other countries that are trying to be obstruct that process. Nigeria, for example, being one of them. And so there is expected to be an increased U.S. military presence in Nigeria and Ghana as a way of keeping, trying to contain the new neocolonial independence process that's going on in the Sahel.
A couple of things. One, if you look at this over the longer arc of history, France went into Haiti
Mm-hmm.
and the Haitians ran France out. The United States steps in and fills the vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
France goes into Vietnam.
Right.
The Vietnamese run France out.
Mm-hmm.
The United States tells France, no, stay in and we will underwrite your war efforts against the Vietnamese.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, France takes such a whipping that they say we can't endure this any longer. The United States steps in, fills the void, gets his hind parts whooped, and gets run out of Vietnam. France goes into. Are we seeing a pattern here? And I just find that I know that there are differing dynamics
Mm-hmm.
involved in each country, but just overall at a 30,000-foot level,
Mm-hmm.
I see a pattern here.
Yes, there seems to be a pattern where the U.S. goes in at the waning moments of France's control of a country and takes over a country that is moving towards its own independence, and eventually has to give up that attempt to control that country. These African countries are not going to gain their independence from neocolonialism easy.
Mm-hmm.
There is going to be pushback. Part of the protestations by Emmanuel Macron, the president of France,
Mm-hmm.
over the war in Ukraine and his attempts to threaten Russia. We're going to send troops into Ukraine. Part of that, the
Wait a
analysis
minute,
is that
to which Putin said, and I'm gonna send missiles into France.
yes. Part of that flailing by Macron is I believe that many others believe tied to the fact that France is getting pushed out of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Macron is wanting to show that France is still important, it's still tough, and it's being pushed out of Africa. France wants to, at least Macron wants to send soldiers into Ukraine to weaken Russia, in order to weaken Russia's role in Africa, in order to get back into those countries. But this is a failed proposition.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, if in response to the threat by Macron to send troops into Ukraine to fight the Russians very much Putin said that, okay, well then that's an act of war against Russia, and they reserve the right to go directly to war with France and any other NATO country that gets directly involved.
Zhu Yun makes the point, if you don't like working for Uber, then work for another company in the same industry. And Zhu Yun, here's where you're missing the entire damn point. It has nothing to do with working for Uber. It's why are you working for Uber? If you're a college student who decides, or if you're a high school student who just got your driver's license, and you decide, you know what, I want to make some money so I can make money, save money to go to college. If you're a college student and you decide after you're finished with your classes, you got some time on your hands after you've gone to the library, and I'm gonna say to my son, go to the library. You want to drive for Uber and make some money? Cool. And if you don't like the terms of Uber, go to Lyft or go wherever you want to go. That's not the point, Zhu Yun. The point is, if you have to drive for Uber because you can't get a 40-hour a week job with benefits because the U.S. economy is in the toilet, that, Zhu Yun, is the point. And if you don't get that point, then there are a hell of a lot of other points you'll never understand.
Yeah, there's what comes to mind is the statement to Marie Antoinette: "The people don't have bread." Okay,
let them eat cake.
Eat cake. You know, okay, we don't have a job, so you're working for Uber. Well, you don't like Uber, go work for Lyft. You know,
right?
You know.
But I highlighted that not to pick on anybody, but that is I believe, particularly on the MAGA side of the equation, that's the mindset of a lot of people, that there are choices here, and that people are just arbitrarily, or that people are just making choices when in fact, no, the economy is not nearly as robust as reported, and that people aren't making choices, people are being forced into action.
Yeah, and part of the rhetoric to promote this idea of what's called the gig economy is that, you know, we can all become entrepreneurs. That is, you know, the great American dream is to have a house and to be self-employed. So we can all become self-employed. We can all be fired from our jobs, and then we can all go to work for Lyft. I mean, or to work for Uber. But you know, you're a contractor. In a sense, you know, you are self-employed. That's wonderful if you can also have the opportunity to make a living if you didn't want to become a self-employed. But if you're forced into being self-employed because you've been laid off because of let's say AI increase in a use of artificial intelligence for someone in programming or otherwise, then you really don't have a choice. I mean, your choice, I guess, is to work for Uber or starve. That's your choice. Not a good choice.
2 points. One from U.S. Navy vet Dr. Tauheed Salam: is Social Security paid out in full until 2035, and will the 2 million added to the Social Security rolls draw Social Security down a few years until 2033? I read it will be a burden against the program. Is that true?
I think he makes a good point. I hadn't thought about this, but yes, if there are increased Social Security obligations because of this spending, then one could make the argument that the Social Security program will become, quote, insolvent earlier, not 2035, but earlier. Now, people from my school of economic thought thinks that this whole cry that the Social Security program is going to become insolvent, therefore we should privatize Social Security, or we should reduce benefits, or increase the Social Security retirement age, is just a continuation of the Republican program to eliminate Social Security completely. We don't have enough money. Now, the insolvency doesn't mean that Social Security doesn't have any money. It just means it won't have enough on the current schedule to pay out its obligations. But there are solutions to this. I mean, if you're interested in that, Bernie Sanders has introduced a bill saying, look, let's remove the cap
Mm-hmm.
Social Security tax payments. Right now, there's a cap. It's $168,800. If you make over that, then the Social Security part of your employment insurance you don't have to pay. If we remove that cap, and what Sanders is saying, let's not remove the cap for someone who's making $169,000.
Mm-hmm.
Let's remove the cap for those who are making over $400,000.
It's important though to point out in salary,
yes,
not income. So if your salary, if your paycheck
yes,
is $1 million, you're making a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah, so it's not on
It's not on investment income.
It's not on investment. It's on salary income.
It's not on income. It's on salary, and
right.
that's the point that people need to understand.
Yeah, it's what you pay employment insurance on. You remove the cap over those making $400,000. That will make Social Security insolvent for the rest of the century. And
you mean solvent?
Solvent, yes.
Yeah, you said insolvent.
Yeah, it will make it solvent for the rest of the century, and you could increase Social Security benefits and still
lower the retirement age.
Yes. Yeah. So there's a solution to this. Just have the wealthy pay their fair taxes.
There you go. In fact, I'll make this generalization because I haven't done the math and I haven't talked to you about this offline talk to the greater minds than mine. I would offer Donald Trump a trade-off. We can talk about your extending your 2017 tax cuts in certain aspects if you agree to remove the ceiling on the Social Security tax.
That would be what you would think a Democrats would do. I mean, Democrats are, they are a minority in the House, but not a great minority. Right. I think it's only 2 votes, and so they are in a position to negotiate over this process. But unfortunately, too many Democrats agree with the Republicans on this. They're Republican light.
Correct.
They're
Reagan Republicans.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Because if Ronald Reagan were alive today, he'd be a conservative Democrat. He wouldn't be a Republican.
Yes, and yes. So the Republican. Look, Richard Nixon was one of the most liberal presidents in recent history, liberal by Democratic. He would be a liberal now. He would be on the left of a Reagan. And so the Democratic Party has moved significantly to the right, as you said, since the Clinton administration. And if the Democrats were really interested in saving Social Security, they would agree with Bernie Sanders and negotiate to have the ceiling lifted. But they don't agree with
that. What I mentioned USAID earlier in the conversation, talking about West African countries, because people need to understand, and this is not my opinion, this is very well known, that USAID is basically an arm of the CIA that uses aid now as its foray into the politics and regime change. And the CIA used to just do it directly. Now they do it through USAID. So I just wanted to make that point as we wrap up the discussion about the alliance of Sahel states and BRICS. More countries are joining BRICS. More African countries are requesting to join BRICS. Are you working along that area? What do you see? What do you want the audience to walk away from this conversation understanding about the rise of conflict in West Africa, and what is your work regarding dealing with that right now?
Yeah, in regard to BRICS, I would expect that certainly more African countries would want to join BRICS. I would expect these Sahel countries that are becoming independent to want to join BRICS. Now, no, understand, BRICS is a confederation of countries that want to trade with each other.
Hmm.
It does not mean that those countries don't want to trade with the West.
Correct.
But what they want is a fair trade.
Hmm.
They want to be able to sell their goods to other countries and get the joint benefit that's supposed to happen, the win-win situation. And one of the things that's being promoted about BRICS is that the BRICS countries are wanting to replace the dollar with some other currency. That's not what BRICS is about. BRICS is not saying that, Indonesia has just joined BRICS. As a condition of joining the BRICS, the Indonesians are not restricted from having sales with the US or other Western economies. They can still use the dollar or the euro in that process. But within the BRICS countries, they're going to be able to use their own currency. They won't have to use the Chinese currency or the Russian currency. BRICS is not trying to create a replacement currency for the US dollars. They're wanting to create a process whereby countries can use their own currency to maintain monetary sovereignty
Hmm.
in order to trade with each other, and then they'll work out the arrangement so that we don't have an imbalance in that trade. And so when we have, for example, the Sahel countries or countries in Africa that are wanting to join BRICS, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Nigeria and South Africa are already part of BRICS. Those countries are wanting to trade with each other and with other countries in the majority of the world, and get a fair benefit. So you don't sell your uranium for $1 a kilo when you could sell it for $200 a kilo. You sell it, and the buyer benefits and the seller benefits. Maybe you sell it for $100 a kilo. And so what BRICS is wanting to do is this is not just a kind of a temporary pushback on Western colonialism. This is a significant change in the relationship of countries in trade, not to be dominated by China. China doesn't seem to want to do that, and certainly not to be dominated by Russia, but to allow countries to have sovereignty and to benefit from trade with each other without having to sacrifice the benefits to the West.
And it's also important, I believe, in this whole conversation for people to understand that there are, I'll say, three types of warfare.
Mm.
There's direct military conflict, there's economic warfare, and there's information warfare.
Mm-hmm.
And what the BRICS are doing is they are creating a bulwark against the economic warfare
Mm-hmm.
element of this.
Mm-hmm.
In that, remember, folks, when the Ukraine conflict started, Joe Biden came on television and told us he was going to turn the ruble into rubble.
Right.
Economic warfare was one of the United States responses or tactics in terms of trying to bring Russia to heel. And the SWIFT system, the SWIFT banking system, and removing Russia off of the SWIFT banking system was supposed to collapse the Russian economy. Well, what did they do? They said, oh, we'll just create another system outside your system so that you can't use the dollar as a missile or as a bomb and devastate our economies. Is that too simplistic?
No. It's exactly what happened. BRICS came into being in 2009. So it's not a new phenomenon.
Correct.
For most of that time, from 2009 until 2022, there was very little activity going on with BRICS, at least very little visible activity. It wasn't until the Western sanctions against Russia, that it became obvious to not only the BRICS countries, which were only 5 at the time, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It became obvious to other countries that they needed to have some delinking of their economies from the Western economies, because if you use the SWIFT system, and the U.S. Gets across at you and removes you from the SWIFT system, your economy is going to collapse. Now, Russia's economy didn't collapse because Russia has vast resources, and they were ready for that delinking from the SWIFT systems. They had been working as part of BRICS to do that, but it was underground. But after 2022, when the West began to have sanctions on Russia, and Russia responded by creating their own delinking and wanting to use their own currency, then other countries began to realize that this BRICS process was the way to go, and now we have this increase in activity. I mean, the increase in activity in terms of membership and planning and processes that we have in BRICS has only been the last 2 years as a result of the sanctions against Russia that were intended to collapse the Russian economy, but in fact did the opposite. It caused Putin and the Russian economy and those to realize that they needed to be delinked from the West if they were going to survive, and so they did so. And an example is that oil is not the sanctions were against Russia selling oil directly to European countries. And so what Russia has done is sold their oil to India, and India sells their oil to European countries. That's good for India. Increased revenue to India, and it in fact didn't decrease the revenue of oil into Russia. So they found a way around it. So that, India has become a significant trading partner with Russia as a result of these sanctions, and other countries in BRICS will do the same thing. As the West begins to push back and to push harder against the loss of their former colonies, these other colonies are standing up and becoming more independent, more economic and monetarily sovereign, and are able to benefit from that process.
And what I think, final point here as we get out, is I think it's very, very, very important for people to understand the responses that the tactics that you are explaining are responses to American action. That a lot of what we're seeing in terms of the rise of BRICS, the whole movement to trade off of countries' currencies away from the dollar, a lot of these things are in response to the U.S. sanctions regime, the U.S. going in and stealing sovereign wealth funds from Venezuela, from Russia, from Libya, that don't start nothing, won't be nothing.
Right.
But the United States, in terms of its imperialist policies, its hegemonic policies, its refusal to understand that we are shifting from a unipolar to a multipolar world, and there's not a damn thing that the United States can do about it. Those are the things that have exacerbated these situations, and to the point to where we are now.
Yeah, and to go back into that 2009 period, in the beginning of 2009, the director of the Chinese central bank made a proposal to the West that the Western countries could set up a system allowing currency trade in the way that BRICS is now moving, and that process could be managed by the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which is a Western-oriented fund. That proposal was made by the Chinese. That proposal wasn't acted on by the West. BRICS was then formed in the end of 2009 as a response, saying, okay, you're not taking our suggestion that we cooperate better, so we're going to plan to go on our own. So it wasn't that the BRICS formed as in opposition to the West. What those folks wanted was for the West to become part of this more fair global trading system. The West did not respond in that way.
And another example of that, not economically, but Russia wanted to become a part of NATO.
Mhm.
And the West said absolutely not.
Mhm.
And now we are where we are. Dr. Linwood Tauheed, my dear brother, thank you so much for your time today. Greatly, greatly appreciated. And as always, look forward to having you back.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Thank you all for going through or staying with us through this technical issue that we had. Glad that my brilliant producer was able to resolve the issue. Stay tuned for new episodes every day. KJ No is going to be with us tomorrow. He's just returned from South Korea, and so we're going to get an update on what's happening in Korea. Also, please follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show. Follow us on social media. You can find all the links below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I'm Dr. Wilmer Leon. If you're on the East Coast, stay warm. If you're on the West Coast, we're praying for you, and we hope we can get them fires put out. Have a great one. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Hey,